Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 51, Why Sci-Fi? With author Mary Fan.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, assembled hordes of the internet, I am apparently controversial historian. No, renegade. I am a renegade D&D historian. That is my new sobriquet. I've decided it. I am renegade D&D historian Ben Riggs. This is reading D&D aloud, where we take a serious look at role-playing games. But today we do not have a role-playing game personality with us. Instead, we have author, writer, Mary Fan. And Mary is a sci-fi fantasy writer. Her works include Badass Moms and Brave New Girls, but which I only chose because they were my favorite titles out of all your titles. It was Badass Moms grabbed me. That was not a sentence I thought I'd say this morning when I woke up. But when I asked you the other night, what book of yours would you recommend? What book did you say again?
I said stronger than a bronze dragon because it's a standalone fantasy, so it's like low commitment. If you hate it, there's only one book, so you're done.
And anything else you think the audience should know about your career before we just start chit-chatting?
I guess I've been doing this for a while now. My first book came out in 2013, which is terrifyingly long ago from 2025. I mostly write young adult sci-fi and fantasy, although I've also written a bunch of short stories that are in varying genres. And the two books that you mentioned, Badass Moms and Brave New Girls, are both collections of short stories. So I'm also an anthology editor. And in terms of Brave New Girls, that's actually an anthology series that we first started publishing in 2015. And we are currently on our ninth volume.
Ooh. So we met at the Gen Con Writers Seminar. How did you end up in the Gen Con Writers Seminar?
That's a great segue because it's because of Brave New Girls. So, Brave New Girls is an independently published anthology series. It started with myself and my co-editor, Paige Daniels, who is also a sci-fi writer, just kind of crowdfunding it ourselves and then trying to figure out how to promote it. And Paige Daniels, her real name is Tina, and that's not a secret or anything. Her bio literally says Paige Daniels is the pen name of Tina Closser. She lives in Indiana, and so we were looking for places to promote Brave New Girls, and she was like, "There's this huge gaming convention like right next door to me. We should go check it out." And I was like, "Okay." And I live in New Jersey, by the way, so that was like a 12-hour drive for me. But I had such a great time that I've been coming back ever since. And yeah, 2015 till now, this will be like I think year 10. Although not convention 10 because we missed one in there somewhere.
Wow. Um, so as a not super gamer, but obviously you're in the genre scene. Like, what is your take on Gen Con? What is your experience when you're there?
Sure. So Gen Con is great if you're just into, I think, geekdom in general, because even though I'm not a gamer myself, there's a lot of crossover with other interests about sci-fi and fantasy and even like, cosplay and um it's just a great scene and I really love coming out there. And I love meeting the other writers because there's a really strong like writing scene at Gen Con thanks to the Writer Symposium and also because of Authors Avenue in the exhibit hall. I think Gen Con was the first and still one of the few conventions I've seen that has a specific area for authors rather than just artists and then sticking a few writers in with all the visual artists. So that was really nice.
It's remarkable to me how much you can pick up at the Gen Con Writers Symposium. Being in Wisconsin, Gen Con started here and then moved to Indy, and I've been to a lot of Gen Cons, and one of my some of my best Gen Con memories are going and sitting in the symposium sessions and listening to writers, and it's amazing how close you can get to the celebrities in that sense. In some ways, it's silly to are writers celebrities. I mean, some of us are, but like,
Depends on who you ask.
you tell me your experience, but it certainly does get you attention. at a bar, like my again, I teach seventh and eighth grade by day. My boss loves trotting out, he's a published author. He got a review in the Washington Post. Oh my God, like, my
Mhm.
boss does it all the time. Uh, but I certainly don't like wake up in the morning thinking, my review in the Post, yes. But do you ever feel like a celebrity?
No. Sometimes I'm surprised when I get treated like one. I think because I don't know, I feel like us writers, we're all very scrappy, and it's not a very glamorous business. It's not like we're like, walking around on red carpets in couture gowns and getting invited to the Met Gala or anything. So I think we're at the end of the day just like wordsmiths. We're like, the library kid who never grew up inside. Like, so we don't think of ourselves as being anything great. But then you got to remember when you were like, before you were published, like when you were just an emerging writer and you saw someone with a published book and you're like, that's so cool. Like somebody, printed those words and put a cover on it and it's a real book. And yeah, I guess at one point you go from being that bright-eyed, like, oh my God, authors are so cool. What would I give to be one? To being one and being like, oh, okay, but I have more deadlines, and you don't really appreciate how cool it is that you made it.
Yeah, I remember. So again, I've only had one book come out because my books take 5 years because they have to be accurate to reality. Um,
That's what you get for writing nonfiction.
I know it's a
You could
curse.
always provide alternative facts.
I mean, I will. I at times I identify as a failed fiction writer, Mary. Um, like after my first book came out, because I write nonfiction, it's hard to be like, well, what's next? Um, I was looking for a story. Uh, I thought maybe I had again. I try to have some sort of Wisconsin angle or something that's gonna uh, provide a portal for me into it. I thought I had a story about teens committing crimes in the 1990s, but then that fell apart. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna write a novel. And again, I've written, I'm gonna say 5 to 10 novels that I tried to get published and failed over the course of my career. I'm like, all right, I have one successful book under my belt. A thing I keep hearing is it's a page turner. It's a business book, but that's a page turner about D&D. And I'm like, okay, what if I tried horror? So, a genre that lends itself to page turning. I spent 18 months writing a novel, uh, sent it to my agent. I don't know that she read more than a quarter of it before being like, "Meh."
Oh no, that's
I'm like,
heartbreaking.
okay, I'm still a failed fiction writer, but I'm working on a second volume on D&D, and that's going really, really well. I'm very optimistic about that. So again, you know, uh, it's like Russell Crowe being complaining he's not in a rock band or something. Um, Not that I'm Russell Crowe. That's not a perfect analogy, but let me ask you this. So it looks like you write almost exclusively in fantasy sci-fi. Why those genres? Is it just what your angels bring you?
It's just what I've always liked. I mean, I guess when I was like really little, I might have tried my hand at some like little kid story that took place at school or something. But the first thing I actually remember writing was when I was 12, and it was, in hindsight, thinly veiled Star Trek fanfic, which I didn't even realize because I didn't even watch Star Trek at the time. But Star Trek was just so, I guess, culturally pervasive that I was like, I'm writing about a crew and they're exploring outer space. And in hindsight, that's Star Trek, isn't it? But yeah, I guess it was just always what I liked to read. Yeah, I guess I was the kid that never grew up. When I was a kid, I always wanted something with magic or something out there in it. And I don't know, as I grew older, I gravitated more towards sci-fi for a period of time. And I feel like I'm still more generally a sci-fi person, at least in terms of what I like to consume. But that said, there's a lot of fantastic fantasy that I enjoy as well.
So, let me ask this then: what sci-fi do you enjoy?
Well, now I've watched all of the Star Treks and I very much enjoy them, even the ones that are a little funky. Let's see. Yeah, you know what? I feel really lame. I feel like I'm just gonna name all the big franchises because I also liked Star Wars, Stargate. Oh, here's a blast from the past. I really liked Andromeda, back in the day. At least the first two seasons. The latter three kind of fell off the rails. Um, yeah, those were some. I guess they all take place in space, don't they? I guess I just like outer space.
Well, you wrote for both Star Wars Insider and the official Star Trek website. Is that correct?
Yeah, for a period of time.
All right, so I'll ask you the obvious question: Trek or Wars, which is superior?
What? Why would you do that? Apples and oranges, come on.
For me, when I was younger, it was Wars. But I've definitely come around to Trek. Um, I've really enjoyed Strange New Worlds, and especially season one. I think I've watched it two or three times. Um, it just seems to catch the right spirit, and but it's maybe a little bit more fun than some of the other episodes, than some of the other series. Um, and yet it will still introduce sci-fi concepts that can be truly disturbing. Like, spoiler alert for season one of Strange New Worlds, they, rescue a religious figure and get him to the festival at which he is installed in a pain amplifier
That
that
was
runs their
practically
civilization.
plagiarism, though. That episode was a ripoff of Ursula Le Guin's short story.
I mean, yeah, that's the ones who walk away from Oelos.
Yep, that one. We all had to read it in high school.
I mean, it
Which
certainly
leads me
is
to
very
wonder, don't
similar.
those writers realize we all read that story in high school and we're going to see their plagiarism coming from a million miles away?
Well, if as long as we're talking about Ursula K. Le Guin, she certainly seemed to think that the reason to write fantasy and sci-fi was to provide an escape, and anyone who damned it as a waste of time for being an escape is like some sort of jailer. Any thoughts on that?
I think I mean, she said it best. Because fantasy and sci-fi, they allow us to imagine worlds not as they are, but either as they could be or could have been. They allow us to just go wild with imagination sometimes. Just be like, what if I just threw in, this monster that has been haunting my nightmares, and what if it came to life? What if, we took something that wasn't too dissimilar from what we're living in and just like added some sort of funky twist or something. So, yeah, like why would you just want to stay in the real world? It can be so boring here sometimes.
So now your background is not science, correct?
Correct.
So when you are writing sci-fi, how much science is there in it?
Not a lot. I tend to write very soft, squishy sci-fi. And I guess because, for me at least, the science in sci-fi sometimes was almost beside the point. I cared more about the impact of that, speculative technology element, what the impact it had on the characters and the society that, had to experience that technology, etc. That's not saying that, those really technical pieces of sci-fi aren't like completely valid. I very much admire the people who can just like, go really deep into the science and explain everything and come up with like a completely plausible machine that no one's ever invented yet. That's just not where my mind goes. I tend to care more about, I guess, the characters, the people, and the way it affects them.
Well, it feels like there is a default sci-fi setting that has kind of condensed over the past few decades in the way that in the 80s and 90s there was a sort of default fantasy setting. Um, and again, my mind goes to like, have you read Murderbot?
I have not.
So again, if you when you get the chance, get it from the library probably because they're pretty short. Uh, but the Murderbot books are both delightful, and I feel like they're a great example of kind of this default sci-fi setting where it's the point is not really the exploration or the science or even necessarily the politics. It's just this character-driven piece. And the character is Murderbot, which is a security unit that hacked its own governor module and has gone rogue, but is pretending to still be obeying the corporation, but isn't. And it also, I haven't looked this up, but it certainly seems to be a sort of story about autism or people being somehow special needs in some way because Murderbot is this like human robot hybrid and it has emotions but also it doesn't want hugs and like at one
Hmm.
point a frightened person cuddles Murderbot and Murderbot is like ah you know, Murderbot jumped down the throat of a dragon the first time you meet Murderbot, but the hug is totally ooking Murderbot out. Um, so I'm certainly not saying anything about like, well, you have to have a BA in science. But do you feel like you work on a default in that kind of default setting? Do you make each one of your settings unique? Let me get this. How do you come up with your settings?
Um, that's a good question because they're all pretty different. I mean, I guess in terms of the sci-fi ones, usually there's like some element I want to explore. So for my first trilogy, the Jane Colt trilogy, it takes place in space, but I really wanted to explore the idea of what makes someone human. And I did that through like, kind of that whole well, before AI meant ChatGPT, back when AI meant like, humanoid robots like you would see in like, Star Trek with Data or in Steven Spielberg's movie AI. So I kind of wanted to explore that line. It's like, okay, at what point does the machine become human? Like, where is that line? So for that one, I kept the setting pretty like generically like space adventure because I didn't want to get into it. I didn't want to spend a lot of time like, explaining a whole other government system or anything because that was kind of beside the point of the story. And then another sci-fi setting I came up with was for my young adult trilogy, Starswept, which is probably the squishiest, softest like sci-fi you can imagine. Because that one I really wanted to explore. I really want to explore like the idea of like being an artist and like what you have to give up to do that. And I did it in the frame of this like young adult dystopia where like all these kids are like, living on this sort of depopulated version of Earth where there's just like not a lot of ways for them to have a future except to go perform music on this alien planet that doesn't have any music. So yeah, that one I kind of designed the setting just to like put the performing arts in the forefront so that I could really explore that artist aspect.
So, would you describe yourself as an AI optimist or an AI pessimist?
Um, that's a tough one. I think in terms of our current conversations around AI, like ChatGPT and Dolly and all that, I think some of the alarm is a bit overblown because I don't know, have you seen the stuff they put out? Would a true mathematician be afraid of a calculator? Let's put it that way. Because that's what they are. They're calculators. They are functional machines. They will spit out an answer, but they're only as good as the person behind it. So I do believe there are ways that, artists can even use AI to their advantage. Of course, the plagiarism aspect is a huge problem that needs to be resolved before anyone can really ethically use them. But the idea that they're going to like replace us all and that we're just going to have like AI published books on the shelves and nothing else, I think we're still a whiles off from that.
See, and I am, depending on your point of view, either an extreme optimist or extreme pessimist in that I do believe AI is going to bring about uh, profound and disturbing change in a relatively short period of time. Again, I'm 2 years, 10 years, I couldn't tell you because I certainly agree with you. I'm not exactly trembling in my boots about the AI short stories being written today, but and as AI improves, I think we're just going to move beyond, oh my God, what if they write novels to uh they're waking up in Silicon Valley and AI is deceiving its own creators, attempting to somehow break out of whatever systems we've imposed on them. So I certainly believe that AI and my God, the scientific discoveries, um, they could solve global warming and destroy us. So I'm definitely in that camp. I am in the I think that what we've seen so far is just the fingernail of what is coming. Um, but yeah, yeah,
I
the
mean,
majority. Go ahead. Sorry.
I feel like they were miles off from that because, as far as I can tell, the way they're building AI is it's algorithmic, right? Like it can't actually create anything. All it can do is vacuum up tons of information and recognize patterns and then regurgitate out a prediction of like what it thinks you want based on patterns, which, can be pretty convincing. Like maybe it'll like write a convincing like facsimile of a Shakespeare play or something, but it's never going to have that original thought that you need to actually accomplish some of the things you're describing.
Are you aware of Accelerando by Charles Strauss?
Mm-mm.
So he's a Scottish sci-fi writer. He might be best known for the Laundry Files. It was kind of like British X-Files, but with Cthulhu, really more disturbing. He's a very disturbing writer. Like he might be more weird horror than sci-fi, although there's a serious sci-fi sheen to it all. And he wrote a novel, I'm going to say 15 years ago, called Accelerando, which was, what if you actually lived through the period of AI somehow becoming dominant and fusing with robots and nanotechnology to profoundly change the world. Um, he wrote it as what he thought of as a sort of future nightmare, and yet it was largely received by people in the know as a kind of great blueprint for the future. My favorite part of it was on a colony around Saturn. AI started building dead humans and basically putting the memories of historical personages into their brains, and we got to watch H.P. Lovecraft wake up on a moon of Saturn, and I'm like, that's hilarious. Well done, Charles Strauss. And again,
Nice.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I just said that's pretty funny.
And again, I'm a history and English teacher and a renegade D&D historian. So again, I certainly have no knowledge, firsthand knowledge of this either, other than my computer science friends are getting concerned. Um,
Okay.
like
I will say, I think AI itself, it's just a tool at the end of the day, and I'm not worried about the tool. I'm worried about who's wielding it. I worry that AI is not creating the kinds of things, like things of the kinds of caliber and quality that we would expect from a human creator, but that because it's cheap and it's fast, we're going to get fed it anyway. Like, why would Netflix pay a room full of writers if they can just plug it into the machine? And we're just going to get schlock. We're just going to be caught in a cycle of schlock because people think it can do more than it actually can. That's what concerns me.
I have friends in LA in the entertainment industry, and one of them told me that in a meeting with a streaming executive discussing a possible upcoming project, the streaming executive was very concerned about, how are people going to follow this story when they're folding their laundry? And just kept coming back to that, this sort of assumption that, like, well, the audience is going to be multitasking. They're not actually going to sit down and watch this, like, the whole time straight through. So you need to really spoon feed it to them. And I'm like, that would explain some of the dreck that we've seen lately on the streamers, but
That
God,
really does
AI
explain a
dreck.
lot.
Do you have any comfort reads, any books that you return to again and again and again?
I don't know. I feel like I have in the past, but I'm like kind of drawing a blank right now. I feel like when I need comfort and I just need to turn off my brain because, half my life is words. I don't want words. So I had just like watching Drek on TV.
Okay, do you
Or
have
I
any
just watch
comfort?
Star Wars again.
Well, so let's see. Well, I guess that was going to answer my question. What is your comfort trek? Although I'm not going to say that Star Wars is comfort trek. So I'll ask this: Last Jedi, pro or con?
Ooh.
Oh, really? Oh, I liked Last Jedi. What
Oh, you're one of those, aren't you?
what didn't you care for?
Um, I first just didn't care for, so it is a sequel to The Force Awakens, and I didn't care for the fact that it seemed to try to undo everything The Force Awakens was trying to set up. It's like I keep saying it's like the worst round robin ever, where it's like, one person wrote chapter one and they pass it on to the next person to write chapter two, and the second person's like, actually, screw chapter one. I'm going to completely just like rip it apart and pretend it never even happened. And so I just didn't like that attitude that the whole movie had that was like, forget The Force Awakens, it was wrong. This is Star Wars now. And I'm like, great. And I really didn't like that casino storyline.
Certainly, I'll grant you that didn't go very far.
And
Um,
I really did not like the fact that Kylo Ren, like 2 minutes after murdering his father in front of Rey, is suddenly the love interest. I'm like, that's disgusting. Why does this have such a big fan base?
I mean, Adam Driver, man,
Oh, don't get me wrong. Adam Driver is a fox and a half. But he is also an actor.
Okay, so favorite Star Wars.
Empire, of course.
Okay. What do you think about Andor? Are you excited?
I haven't watched Andor. You know why though? I've heard it's good, but also it looks depressing. And I guess for me, like, the original trilogy was always my comfort watch because it's optimistic. It has a happy ending. It's about, good triumphing over evil. So to me, like that optimism was always part of Star Wars to me, like that fairy tale like aspect. And I know Andor is exploring a different part of that same world, and that's fine. It's just not the Star Wars I want to watch, personally.
I would tell you again, hope with no spoilers, that I believe it comes to that same optimistic place, but through a different, grittier route. Um, it may like it. So, consider that even though it's not the monomyth, it's not Joseph Campbell, it's not the hero's journey. Um, until someone comes along and says it is the hero's journey. But I would say that it's very different, but it's like still feels like Star Wars. But yeah, it's certainly not a fairy tale. So if that is what you demand in your Star Wars, do avoid it.
I mean,
Um,
maybe someday I'll be in the mood to be terribly depressed, but I haven't been in that mood lately.
so you were kind enough to pull up a Stanislaw Lem short story, and I was wondering if you would be so kind as to share it with us.
Yeah, sure. So, this is, I'm sorry, my Zoom is like making the cover vanish. This is I don't know actually how you pronounce it. It's one of these words that I've only seen written. I think the Siberiad.
Sounds good to me.
It's a collection of short stories, starring these two robot constructors. They're very strange in that like the world doesn't really make sense from like I guess a logical or scientific point of view. They're more written kind of as satirical allegories. And I actually have this book because it was gifted to me by a high school friend like shortly before graduation. So I've had it for a million years. Like the pages are very yellow. And I remember we were both big fans of Hitchhikers, and that's why he thought I would enjoy it because it's also got that kind of like tongue-in-cheek attitude. And I just remember like tearing through the whole thing and being like, wow, sci-fi can be like really fun and like also really weird. I love it.
What's the name of the short story?
So the short story is How the World Was Saved, and it's the leading story in this collection. I think Lem actually published these like, over the course of several years, possibly even in different publications. But they've been like sort of collected and bound and sold as a book.
All right, and listeners, it's 5 pages long, but we're gonna try and do the whole thing. We're gonna see how this goes.
All right. Let me first clarify that Troll is not human. He is supposed to be some kind of godlike robot, I think.
Cool beans.
One day, Churl the constructor put together a machine that could create anything starting with N. When it was ready, he tried it out, ordering it to make needles, then nankeens and negligees, which it did, then nailed the lot to nargils filled with nepenthe and numerous other narcotics. The machine carried out his instructions to the letter. Still not completely sure of its ability, he had it produce, one after the other, nimbuses, noodles, nuclei, neutrons, naphtha, noses, nymphs, naiads, and natrium. This last it could not do, and Churl, considerably irritated, demanded an explanation. Never heard of it, said the machine. What? But it's only sodium. You know, the metal, the element. Sodium starts with an S, and I only work in N. But in Latin, it's natrium. Look, old boy, said the machine, if I could do everything starting with N in every possible language, I'd be a machine that could do everything in the whole alphabet. Since any item you care to mention undoubtedly starts with N in one foreign language or another, it's not that easy. I can't go beyond what you programmed. So no sodium. Very well, said Churl, and ordered it to make night, which it did at once. Small, perhaps, but perfectly nocturnal. Only then did Churl invite over his friend Klopaucus, the constructor, and introduced him to the machine, praising its extraordinary skill at such length that Klopaucus grew annoyed and inquired whether he, too, might not test the machine. Be my guest, said Churl, but it has to start with N. N, said Klopaucus. All right, let it make nature. The machine whined and and in a trice, Churl's front yard was packed with naturalists. They argued, each publishing heavy volumes, which the others tore to pieces. In the distance, one could see flaming pyres on which martyrs to nature were sizzling. There was thunder, and a strange mushroom-shaped columns of smoke rose up. Everyone talked at once, no one listened, and there were all sorts of memoranda, appeals, subpoenas, and other documents, while off to the side sat a few old men feverishly scribbling on scraps of paper. Not bad, eh? Said Troll with pride. Nature to a T, admit it. But Klopaucus wasn't satisfied. What, that mob? Surely you're not going to tell me that's nature. Then give the machine something else, snapped Troll. Whatever you like. For a moment, Klopaucus was at a loss for what to ask. But after a little thought, he declared that he would put two more tasks to the machine. If it could fulfill them, he would admit that it was all Churl said it was. Churl agreed to this, whereupon Klopaucus requested negative. Negative? Cried Churl. What on earth is negative? The opposite of positive, of course, Klopaucus coolly replied. Negative attributes, the negative of a picture, for example. Now, don't try to pretend you have never heard of negative. All right, machine, get to work. The machine, however, had already begun. First, it manufactured antiprotons, then anti-electrons, anti-neutrons, anti-neutrinos, and labored on until from out of all this antimatter an anti-world took shape, glowing like a ghostly cloud above their heads. Muttered Klopaucus, displeased. That's supposed to be negative? Well, let's say it is, for the sake of peace. But now here's the third command. Machine, do nothing. The machine sat still. Klopaucus rubbed his hands in triumph, but Churl said, Well, what did you expect? You asked it to do nothing, and it's doing nothing. Correction, I asked it to do nothing, but it's doing nothing. Nothing is nothing. Come. It was supposed to do nothing, but it hasn't done anything, and therefore I've won. For nothing, my dear and clever colleague, is not your run-of-the-mill nothing, the result of idleness and inactivity, but dynamic and aggressive nothingness. That is to say, perfect, unique, ubiquitous, in other words, non-existence, ultimate and supreme, in its very own non-person. You're confusing the machine, cried Churl, but suddenly its metallic voice rang out. Really, how can you two bicker at a time like this? Oh, yes, I know what nothing is, and nothingness. Non-existence, non-entity, negation, nullity, nihility, since all these come under the heading of N as in nil. Look, then, upon your world for the last time, gentlemen, for soon it shall no longer be. The constructors froze, forgetting their quarrel, for the machine was in actual fact doing nothing, and it did it in this fashion. One by one, various things were removed from the world, and the things, thus removed, ceased to exist as if they had never been. The machine had already disposed of Nollards, Nightzebs, Nox, Nex, Nallyrax, Neotremes, and non-Malrigers. For moments, though, it seemed that instead of reducing, diminishing, and subtracting, the machine was increasing, enhancing, and adding, since it liquidated, in turn, nonconformists, non-entities, nonsense, non-support, nearsightedness, narrow-mindedness, naughtiness, neglect, nausea, necrophilia, and nepotism. But after a while, the world was very definitely beginning to thin out around Churl and Klopaucus. Oh my gosh, said Churl, if only nothing bad comes out of this. Don't worry, said Klopaucus. You can see it's not producing universal nothingness, but only causing the absence of whatever starts with N, which is really nothing in the way of nothing, and nothing is what your machine, dear Churl, is worth. Do not be deceived, replied the machine. I have begun, it's true, with everything in N, but only out of familiarity. To create, however, is one thing. To destroy, another thing entirely. I can blot out the world for the simple reason that I'm able to do anything and everything means everything in N, and consequently nothingness is child's play for me. In less than a minute now, you will cease to have existence, along with everything else. So tell me now, Klopaucus, and quickly, that I am really and truly everything I was programmed to be, before it's too late. But Klopaucus was about to protest, but noticed just then that a number of things were indeed disappearing, and not merely those that started with N. The constructors were no longer surrounded by gruncheons, the tarliglists, the shapops, the culinatifacts, the thists, warches, and pritons. Stop! I take it all back. Desist. Whoa, don't do nothing, screamed Klopaucus. But before the machine could come to a full stop, all the brashtations, plusters, larrys, and zits had vanished away. Now the machine stood motionless. The world was a dreadful sight. The sky had particularly suffered. There were only a few isolated points of light in the heaven. No trace of the glorious warches and zits that had, till now, graced the horizon. Great Gauss, cried Klopaucus. And where are the gruncheons? Where, my dear favorite pritons? And where now the gentle zits? They no longer are, nor will ever exist again, the machine said calmly. I executed, or rather only began to execute, your order. I tell you to do nothing, and you, Klopaucus, don't pretend to be a greater idiot than you are, said the machine. Had I made nothing outright in one fell swoop, everything would have ceased to exist, and that includes Churl, the sky, the universe, and you, and even myself. In which case, who could say and to whom it could be said that the order was carried out and I am an efficient and capable machine? And if no one could say it and no one to no one, in what way could I, who also would not be vindicated? Yes, fine, let's drop the subject, said Klopaucus. I have nothing more to ask of you. Only please, dear machine, please return the zits, for without them life loses all charm. But I can't. They're in Z, said the machine. Of course, I can restore nonsense, narrow-mindedness, nausea, necrophilia, neuralgia, nefariousness, and noxiousness. As for the other letters, however, I can't help you. I want my zits, bellowed Klopaucus. Sorry, no zits, said the machine. Take a good look at this world. How riddled it is with huge, gaping holes. How full of nothingness, and the nothingness that fills it from the bottomless void between the stars. How everything around us has become lined with it. How darkly it lurks behind each shred of matter. This is your work, envious one, and I hardly think future generations will bless you for it. Perhaps they won't find out. Perhaps they won't notice, groaned the pale Klopaucus, gazing up incredulously at the black emptiness of space and not daring to look at his colleague Churl in the eye. Leaving him beside the machine that could do everything in N, Klopaucus skulked home, and to this day, the world has remained honeycombed with nothingness, exactly as it was when halted in the course of its liquidation. And as all subsequent attempts to build a machine on any other letter met with failure, it is to be feared that never again will we have such marvelous phenomena as the warches and the zits. No, never again. Isn't it ridiculous?
I mean,
I love
it's
it.
that's amazing. Um, it is in its way a perfect story.
Right?
Um, and zits here, we're talking about pimples, right?
I don't think so. I think it was a nonsense word because this was published in the 70s, I think before zits was common and also in Polish.
Well, and like that's the other, again, as a Polish American, one of the things that jumps out at me would have been the difficulty in translating this, just because of the obviously you're going to have to choose a letter that works with nothingness in English. I don't know that nothingness starts with N in Polish. I'd have to look it up or else call my mother. Um,
Can you,
but
yeah, you can read it in the original Polish and let me know what you find out.
I mean, she could read it in the original. Her first language is Polish, so my grandfather was born in Milwaukee, but then in 1919, when Poland became a country again, they moved back to Poland, which, if you do that math, means that in 1938, my grandfather would be about the right age to be drafted into the Polish military. But he was born in Milwaukee. So they were like, you have a choice. You can either join the Polish army in 1938, or you have to go back to America. And he's like, I'm gonna go back to America, which turned out to be a good choice, given that 1 in 5 Poles died between 1939 and 1945. Um,
Wow.
but I know it was. I want to say that as a percentage of population, Poland might have had the highest number of deaths in the war as a percentage of population. Obviously, not total. That's Russia. But now I'm rambling off into World War II. My God. Uh, but that short story was absolutely incredible. Um,
I'm
and
glad you liked it.
I mean, it's remarkable to me that it is able to keep such a, to me, it seems like a Terry Pratchett tone, while at the same time dealing with such uh, heavy and profound thoughts. So, why do you enjoy it so much? Is it just the like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy aspect, or what is it that it was given to you by a friend in high school? Why does it still resonate, or is it that you had to choose something short to read on a podcast?
All of the above. And also, so I was scouring my bookshelves, looking for something to read because I wanted something that meant something. Obviously I could have been self-promoting and just like been like, here's my latest short story, but I don't know. I wanted something more than that. And I kind of discovered this like tucked into a corner. I was like, oh, that's right. I remember I loved this when I was a teenager. I haven't read it since. And so I kind of reread the first couple of stories. I was like, wait, this is awesome. And I think it's because it uses nonsense and like, humor to paint kind of like a bleak picture.
I
And
mean,
now considering that Lem was, a Polish guy writing in the 70s, like it was like, okay, this makes sense. Like, he probably grew up in a pretty bleak world and just kind of faced it with humor, and like that kind of feels like it's being reflected in these stories.
Well, and if you were gonna, again, I'm speculating now, but I would imagine you, if you were growing up in communist Poland, you would have a much dimmer view of humanity's ability to use technology to successfully affect positive change in the world, you know?
Hmm.
And there certainly is cynicism about that in the story. Like, yeah, you can make this amazing device, but you're gonna have idiots come along and use that device to ruin everything. No more zits, man. No more
Yep,
zits.
exactly. Which kind of comes back to our conversation about an AI.
I
It's so funny.
know.
I swear we didn't plan this.
Well, and I think that so many mythological stories about gods and foolish humans now read as real prophecies about artificial intelligence. Um, are you familiar with Ray Kurzweil?
Mm-mm.
So, uh, I guess you would call him a futurist at this point. He created a number of interesting inventions. I want to say he invented an electric keyboard. He invented an electric keyboard. He invented a like a pen that could read for blind people. So, you know, like an amazing engineer with patents to his name. And about 20 years ago, he became convinced that before he died, and he was a baby boomer, that you would have a merging of artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and robots in such ways that it would allow the reversal of human aging, and some baby boomers would live to be 1,000 years old because of essentially the arrival of artificially intelligent gods that we have created. Um, and it is, you know, people have called it the rapture of the nerds. You know, it's this salvific technological idea. Um, but you can't help but be suspicious of the optimism of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, nobody's going to try and get rich off of the AI. Nobody's going to try and control the AI to immiserate someone else. And Stanislaw Lem certainly seems to be a tonic to that techno-futurist optimism that uh, yeah, that we again just an I was like, how is it going to be to read a full 5-page short story in the middle of the podcast? And I'm like, I got to do this again. You know, you set a high bar. Like, I don't know
No,
what.
I guess Lem set a high bar. It's like he's the one who wrote the perfect story. And you know what? Like just thinking about the other stories that I kind of was reading last night and the ones I remember from when I read it when I was a teenager, I think a lot of them do revisit the same theme where it's like Churl like is like, this arrogant, all-powerful, like, creator, and then like creates something that's truly amazing, but then nothing good comes out of it. And part of it is because, like, Klapaukus feels like challenged or something, and just something goes horribly wrong, like it does in this story. And so I guess he is trying to send a message being like, okay, you can create these amazing things, but without like moral boundaries, like you can't foresee the consequences, and the consequences could be dire.
Well, feel free to disagree with my assumption in this following comment, but um, it is a sad thing to me that the medium of the short story does not have the cultural relevance that it once had. You know,
I
uh,
agree.
because short stories are just so good. Um,
Right?
you know, Poe would talk about the aesthetic experience that he wanted to create, and that the short story was the most effective for creating an aesthetic experience because you could assume that someone would sit down and consume it all in one sitting. So you could really control uh, a person's emotions. Again, I'm vastly summarizing here, but and in my seventh and eighth grade classroom today. We read aloud Born of Man and Woman by Richard Matheson. Are you familiar with that?
Mm.
Really short, I'm gonna call it a page and a half long. Um, and it's written in this sort of guttural child's language. And you pretty rapidly figure out that there's an 8-year-old being kept in the basement by his parents, chained to the wall, beaten by dad. Um, and then over the course of the next page and a half, you come to realize that the child is super strong in some way, oozes something green. Um, a cat gets into the basement where he's chained up and attacks him, and he just says that he squished it all up into a ball and it ran red all over the coal. Um, I know. And of course, you're like, the true monster here is the parents, right? And it ends with him realizing that he's finally strong enough to kind of break out of the basement and take revenge on his parents. And it just ends with this brief paragraph of, uh, I will make them sad that they were ever so mean to me. I promise you I will. And it ends there. And all the seventh graders and eighth graders, I shouldn't say all, 25% of the seventh graders and eighth graders who I read this aloud to were like, that's it? It ends there? What? We don't get to see the part where he actually goes upstairs and gives it to those parents? And their first objection was, we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm like, no, he tells you exactly what he's going to do. He's going to go upstairs and he's going to make his parents pay. Like, you know what's going to happen. And they're like, well, we wanted to see it because the parents are just so evil. And I'm like, but you can imagine it. And what would it do? How would you still feel sorry for this kid if you saw that act of violence? Like the parting there means that you get to remember this kid as the abused kid who's about to take revenge in some way, but you don't have to reckon with the possible awfulness of what's about to happen. Richard Matheson got out at just the right place in that story at just the right time to leave you with just the impression he wanted to. But it was. Uh, Amazing to me to watch these kids ready to crawl out of their skins after just a page and a half of a Richard Matheson short story. And it's so sad that that medium uh, is just not where it was when Shirley Jackson's Lottery generated all this mail to New Yorker. Was it? I think it was published in the New Yorker first, but. So I'll ask this: any other favorite short stories? Since apparently you have whiz bang taste.
Oh boy. Well, I did tell you how it took a lot of scouring my bookshelves to come up with this one, right? I have a terrible memory for things I like. That's my problem. I'm like, okay, I like ooh.
Oh, that's too bad. Well, that just means we'll have to have you on some other time to do this something similar to this again. We'll have to wait 6 months, and then I'll have to be like, can you find another short story and that we can talk about and read aloud? Um, but on that note, how can my audience, which has now clearly fallen in love with your aesthetic, support your work?
So you can find all of my books on my website, which is maryfan.com.
Do you have a Patreon, anything like that?
No, I'm just very simple, just books.
Social media?
Yeah, if you want to follow my social media, it's not very good. It's mostly just, me posting vacation photos and pictures of my cats and showing off on aerial silks. But I'm on Instagram at Astral Colt, ASTRALCOLT. I'm also on Facebook at mfanwriter, and I am technically on Blue Sky, also Astral Colt, though I still haven't quite figured out how to not tweet yet.
I mean, Astral Cult is a great nom de internet. Where did that come from?
It came from my first novel, actually. The title is Artificial Absolutes, but that's a title that the publisher eventually and I eventually settled on. The original title was Astral Sea, but I had a feeling it wouldn't stay because I was like, okay, the idea of an astral sea, that sounds so pretty, but my book is kind of like a sci-fi adventure thriller. It doesn't really quite fit the aesthetic. So when I came up with a Twitter name, I was like, all right, well, I want to make it the title of my book, but I don't know the title of my book. So I'll take the astral part because I figure it's space. And then my main character is Jane Colt.
That's very cool. All right, listeners, I will briefly say, as I do every week, we have a Patreon to support this podcast. We would not have this podcast without your support. Please give us $3 a month. For that, you get access to D&D historical documents that I upload to our Discord, special episodes like the one with second edition D&D designer Zeb Cook, which took place in Hugh Hefner's suite in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. That was amazing. Um, yeah, I just try and give you guys extra good stuff in return for the support for the podcast. So hopefully you give us $3 a month and can enjoy all that extra content. So Mary, anything else you want to say about anything at all? Anything that you think is cool that you want to direct people to?
Well, I just watched a show on Netflix called Eric, and it was really good. So not everything on Netflix is direct.
Fair. Very fair. All right, then with that, I will say goodbye, listeners, and thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.